And welcome to this week's Halftime Talk, where every week we take a brief moment to take a slightly deeper dive into some of the trends impacting the energy markets. And nothing, I think, is more so at the moment than the tankers and what's happening to tankers and floating storage and IMO 2020 and all of that stuff. And we're joined today by Samir Madani, co-founder of tankertrackers.com and the infamous hashtag OOTT, which I don't think the oil markets or OPEC or anybody could survive without now. Samir, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
Listen, let's kick off with more news of the day before we kind of do a bit more reflective conversation. It looks like floating storage and tankers are back in a big contango opportunity. How do you see the markets at the moment today, this week?
I think that it's not going to be as big as the one we had back in the spring, due to the fact that Saudi is not really participating in it. Because if they had shipped roughly 3 or 4 million barrels per day extra on top of what we're seeing now, we would definitely see that in its full glory. So I think
obviously the OPEC cuts seem to take away the great payday that was for tankers in the second quarter.
Definitely, yeah, because the thing is that, yes, you have a lot of vessels that are heading out to sea with a lot of oil. There's about, let's say, 250 million barrels that are heading for China on a constant stream. It's down from actually 309 million a month prior. So it is down, but that's due to the floods in China that were taking place. Yes, there's a lot of bookings, as always, but the thing is that for flow stow to happen, this floating storage, you need a lot of idle time in anchorage, and that's what costs money, obviously. So booking a vessel for long duration of time is where the cost really lays. Now, I don't see that
$20,000 a day. It looks like a steal.
Yeah, I mean, just like a week ago, it was something like $6,000 even,
wow.
Less, 5. And that's coming down from over $250,000 when it spiked almost a year ago, and then subsequently later on in the spring. So that's all over with. Now I think the industry itself, the tanker transport industry, needs to get back to this 20K a day in order to make things move again, because there's obviously with the rates being so low, there's going to be some sacrifices made, which will be bad for the environment in particular, for instance, and also
as you track tankertrackers.com, tracking the picture today, a lot of idle tankers. What do you interpret from that in terms of the demand outlook going into the fourth quarter?
I think that a lot of it is, I don't want to say an act, but it's kind of, it doesn't look like it's too much of a problem, logistically speaking, because China has taken advantage of this opportunity in particular to buy on the cheap, to stockpile as much as they can. And yes, they've had their floods during the course of 2 months over the summer. Southern China was inundated with about I read something like between 4 and 7 months worth of precipitation. So obviously that delayed some things. Just put it on the back burner for a brief period, because now they're going to come roaring back again. We're going to see more consumption, and even because of COVID, you have a situation where people are buying used cars in order to avoid using public transportation. And whatever we see happening in the Far East ends up becoming sort of a what do you call it, like a reflection of the coal mine. Yeah, it kind of tells you where the West will go within just a few months, you know. So we see the same effects playing out in Europe and in the Western Hemisphere, North America. So we're going to see more kids. Now the school's back in session. I have 4 of them. And we're going to see more kids being dropped off by cars instead of riding the bus. You know, that's just a basic. So gasoline will be boosting in consumption, but I think a lot of that will just come from the actual storage itself initially, because they got to wear that off. And refining is down. That's a problem right now for the oil industry, is that refining is down. But I think logistically this will work out well over the coming quarters.
There's a lot of people trying to figure out what's going on with all those tankers that are under anchorage in China. Is there congestion at Chinese ports, or are these floating storage? How do you interpret the buildup of that number of tankers fully loaded sitting off the coast of China?
So in the industry, in tanker tracking industry, we haven't really set a standard as to what defines floating storage. I have approached some colleagues within the industry just about 4 years ago when I started tracking. I asked them, how do you guys work this out? I mean, how do we really define flow stow? Because a vessel can be anchored overnight or it could be anchored over several months. And I decided I'll take a shot at it myself, and I said 30 days. So I want to see a vessel, if a vessel is anchored somewhere for 30 days, fully laden or half laden with oil, cargo, then that's a flow stow to me. Because we saw that in the case in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf itself, where we have the Iranian flow stow of gas condensates and crude oil. And I said, okay, that's got to be the actual perimeter for flow stow. Now, when we look at China, we see mostly congestion, but sometimes the vessels relocate. So they go closer to the port and then they go back, and that messes with the data. And so it's kind of difficult to keep an eye on that constantly. So we do a report once a month, and I would say that it's imperfect. So there's still a lot of tweaking to do. But all in all, if I was just to use how we collect now, there's around over 100 million barrels floating in China's ports right now, or anchorages right now. So, but again, I don't think that's too much of a problem given their consumption, and refining. It's around between 12 and 14 million barrels per day. So all these numbers sound big and scary, but for China, it's just something they can easily work out.
And I think China are coming to a place where they want to have a larger strategic storage capacity. Rather than 80 days, I think, given all the geopolitics and everything, I think they're more comfortable with 100 days.
Absolutely, and you know, they can drag and drop storage tank farms at a rate of 250 million barrel capacity every single year, because they have standard sized tanks that they construct, 100,000 cubic meters, just drag and drop them. We see new farms just pop up year after year, and it's just incredible. It's like if you go in with Google Earth or Google Maps, you will see a very old photo. I assure you, no matter how recent it is, it's very old. It's outdated, because when we look at it with a day fresh photo, we'll see a whole new farm just erect within a period of months.
Now, looking at the current state of, given the sort of collapse in rates for tankers, now I'm seeing talk of possibly increase in scrapping once this current cycle plays out. What's your outlook for scrapping? There's something like close to 30 VLCCs that are 20 years old. What's your thoughts?
We have a lot of, well, there's VLCCs, but then there's also the Suezmaxes. I see a lot of them which are like 25, 27 years old. They're still operating. They're still moving oil. Well, the ones that I follow, they're mostly on the sanctions list. But nonetheless, there's a lot of old tankers that were supposed to be scrapped a long time ago, but they're still in circulation. So some actually get even sent to it, but they never end up there.
Well, it was certainly nice to have when it was April, May time, when there was lots of contango opportunities. Every bucket was looked at as a potential floating storage.
Yes, yes. I can tell you that there is one tanker in particular which just boggles my mind as to that it can last this long, but it's a year older than me, or 2 years older than me. It's around 43 years old, and it's floating in the anchorage in north of Hodeidah, Yemen. It's called Safir. And Safir is a ULCC, or actually an extended VLCC, which can handle up to, I think, 3 million barrels, but it's got over 1 million barrels aboard for the past 5 or so years. Because the war, the conflict, it's just nobody's on the vessel. It's been corroding. It's just a rust bucket, and it's been leaking here and there.
And it has 1 million barrels on it?
Yeah, there's over 1 million barrels of it. It's a catastrophe in the making right now. And there's a similar situation north of, or in Venezuela, between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. There's a FSO floating there as well with over 1 million barrels aboard, also actually flooded with water. So they're working on getting rid of the excess water that's just flooded the entire, all the rooms aboard. So we have 2 pending massive disasters, and it's 2020. I don't need to tell you what that may look like.
I mean, when you think of that in terms of the shipping lanes off the coast of Yemen and the Horn of Africa,
yeah,
that could be massively disruptive.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Let's just reflect a little bit, Sam, on the year that it is. IMO 2020 seemed to be the only thing we were talking about at the beginning of the year before all this other drama kicked in.
Yeah.
How has that impacted the tanker industry? Are those who did scrubbers the winners, or are those who went the ultra low sulfur fuel oil the winners? What kind of year has it been for IMO 2020 and the tanker business?
I'll be honest with you, it's not my particular corner to look at. I've gone through some numbers, and I've looked at the actual SO2 emissions data, and I can see that the net effect of it from the maritime side has improved. So SO2 emissions are down, and that was the whole point of the IMO 2020. So I think there with that regulation, every flag country has its responsibility to enforce this, to make sure that the vessel owners are complying with these regulations, but there is no actual like a global entity which goes out and fines tanker owners. So it's up to every vessel flag country. Now, if some countries are really not bothered too much about it, you might end up in a situation where you have low daily rates will force people to do drastic things, and they might end up switching their flags and whatnot. So that's what I'm worried about, is that these low rates are going to be detrimental for not just the industry, but for the environment itself. You're going to have a lot of sacrifices being made. So yes, there was this big bonanza, this big rush in tanker rates. Everyone got greedy, and then the whole thing just came down faster than Bitcoin in 2017. So I think that's a big thing to worry about. However, I think SO2 in general has been down quite a lot in the first half of the year because of things like less coal being burnt in places like China for the steel production. Yeah, but the thing is that they had, even when they shut down the actual productivity, they had to keep those kilns operational. So they couldn't afford to have the steel cool down, right? So they had to keep burning. So they were adding coal all the time, and coal is what exhausts all this SO2. So I think in general, you're going to have a lot of SO2 coming from land, but less so from the maritime, which, okay, is a win. But when I look at the SO2 right now, I see a lot of refineries still outputting a lot of this stuff. So you're going to need more scrubbers installed at the refineries as well. So
yeah, obviously a lot of the burden of IMO 2020 went on the ships
yes,
and not on the fixed infrastructure on shore, which you would think
exactly
is a big part of the issue. But nonetheless, the shipping industry, the tanker industry seemed to swallow IMO 2020 this year without any much problem. There was, you know, there was all of the kind of uncertainty at the end of last year. A year ago today, we were talking about nothing but IMO 2020, but it seems that it was swallowed without any much issue.
Exactly. Now, in fact, I see a lot of demand for heavy sour crude, given the fact that Venezuela's exports have plummeted to, you know, not all-time lows, but at least a good 7 or 8 decade lows. And that's a big issue. So that was picked up by Iran. They started shipping off more heavy sour crude as a result. So there's a lot of demand for heavy sour because of the fact that it is used for high yields of diesel fuel, and also for the bitumen for asphalt and so on. And that all indicates that the Far East, where all this stuff is being shipped to, has big plans in the making, and that is to expand infrastructure. So they've taken advantage of the low cost in commodities to stockpile, plan out what they're going to do, and then start working on it. So they're executing these plans right now. and they're going to be working on more construction and so on as
What
physical.
about tanker demand growth? Here in the UAE, ADNOC are building up their fleet. Is there what's your outlook for that?
I think it's hard to assess because of the fact that when I see exports themselves, they are down quite a lot. You know, back in Q2, even with the demand being down, we saw still a lot of shipments, and the shipments actually picked up as a result of the OPEC plus talks failing and so on. And I think that now, given the fact that they have done this big push, it's fallen down quite a bit. So it's actually falling in line with, I would say, consumption. So there's demand and then there's consumption. So I think in this big discrepancy, one gives you both consumption and stockpiling, and there's actual consumption. Remember back in March, April, people would walk out on the street and they'll see no cars. That was a reflection of consumption. But demand itself was still high because it was put aboard a vessel to go into another storage tank. It was just moving from A to B, that's it. And somebody bought that on the cheap, obviously.
But if you look at the likes of BP this week, for example, declaring some element of peak oil, sort of reigniting that concept and that discussion. And of course, a lot of people have been discussing that this year because of the demand collapse. What kind of environment is this for somebody to invest in a new 20, 25-year oil tanker? How does that play those two things together from your perspective?
Well, let's see. I would say that if anything, you don't want to buy a shiny new tanker right now. You want to buy something that at least a decade old or so and get good money's worth. Because obviously, at these low oil prices and so on, it's a big risk. But I do see that as of Q1 onwards, we're going to have this possible mood change, I'm thinking, because it feels like if we survive 2020, we're going to roar in 2021. And I think that's all it is. You're just going to have things that were put on the back burner, and it's just going to kick in 2021. And what's it called? A vaccine may pop up, hopefully, no later than Q2, Q3, and then things will just come roaring.
Where do you see any bankruptcies of the tanker business? I mean, how can owners survive these kind of, at $17,000 a day break-even point? You're basically operating at less than break even. How can they afford to hold that for a long?
That is an issue, obviously, and I don't know what they were thinking when they hopped along this whole thing about when it peaked in price. They were all for that, and they were promoting their businesses online, or sorry, on TV about that, on CNBC and so on. And I didn't really like the way it was going. It felt like a real bonanza, and it would be a big blowback later on, very quickly, and it did. And now the industry is ailing as a result of that. But what we do see, however, is this continued pressure, sanction pressure on certain exporters like Venezuela and Iran. And obviously that would mean that less vessels are allowed to interact with these countries to pick up their oil. And that, of course, drives the demand for more tankers. Because if you get a list of 50 or 100 vessels that are suddenly off the global market, and a lot of it is VLCC capacity, then obviously you're going to have a shortage of lifting power.
Yeah, well, that would certainly. I mean, if you have Libya as well to come back, some weeks they're in, some weeks they're out. It does look like this trough for the tanker demand. You could see where it would explode again in the context of those three actors, but there's a lot to indicate that those countries are not coming back anytime soon.
Exactly. I think the biggest concern right now, if we look at the oil market itself, is the actual refinery runs, what they're processing, because we had a pretty good trajectory going on prior to the Hurricane Laura in the US, which hit Louisiana mostly. And it looked like it was coming back, averaging close to 15 million barrels per day in refinery runs. And then the hurricane swept through, and that shut down two key refineries in Lake Charles area. And then obviously that lowers the processing. So they'll have to pull most of the gasoline out from stock and bring that down. So I think what may end up happening now is some more crude builds. So this large or this good run that we've had now with draws and inventory will be now coming up as builds again as a result of that.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, there's a lot of debate yesterday. We saw the CEO of Vitol saying he expects big draws in the fourth quarter on inventories, and then his counterpart at Trafigura is saying the exact opposite. They're expecting a build. I suppose that's what makes these days somewhat exciting, because it's very, very difficult to read the tea leaves on where the markets are going.
Definitely.
You know, we saw minus $40 WTI in April. I mean, plus 40. These are unbelievable, sort of unprecedented days. We were using that word a lot in the second quarter. What do you, in general, would be your sort of headline expectations for 2021?
I would think that we would see a massive improvement in general as of 2021, say end of Q1, beginning of Q2 there somewhere, because we would have spring kicking in and there'll be more people flying. Remember, jet fuel alone is around 8 million barrels per day. So that's around 8% of global supply. And that took a big hit, obviously, with commercial flights stooping to these incredible lows over such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And now they've come back quite a lot. And so I think even the case will be that nobody would want to sit on a full flight. They'll inspect the actual seat layout to see, okay, how packed is this thing really? And then they'll maybe that will even be a premium feature that you can buy online when you book a ticket. It's like, how much distance can you get with your seat? Although it doesn't matter, because even like 20 years ago, anyone sneezed on the airplane, everyone got cold.
Yeah, so it's having traveled once or twice over the last number of months, I found that while there was lots of very positive behavior when people were sitting in their seats, it's a bit like, yes, I'm the best behaved COVID protocol when I'm at home, but once I get up out of my seat, and the crowding in the alley between the seats as people were getting off the plane, it was like just minds were gone very quickly. Right. You're sitting in Sweden, in Stockholm, and I think our viewers would be a little bit interested in the unique experience. Sweden is the only country in the world, I think, that went for the herd immunity strategy, which was basically do nothing, keep doing what in normal life. How has that gone now 6 months into this experience?
I would say in broad strokes, it's gone very well. Micromanagement wise, I would say that there's been a big thing to take care of, and it wasn't handled well because the fact that Sweden doesn't have this top-down hierarchy like you have in Denmark and you have in Finland in particular. Instead, Sweden has a consensus-based approach for everything. So, and unfortunately, that applies to crisis as well. We had the situation also with the tsunami in 2004, where Sweden was one of the last countries from the developed world to actually send out planes to pick up their people. So, and we had over 500 people die as a result of the tsunami. So I think the issue here was that we took a long time in reaching a decision on what to do without imposing any restrictions on personal freedoms. And so that's the thing. So instead of the government actually making decisions, what they did was they handed the ball over to the public health agency, who issued their guidelines. And in turn, the government itself imposed the lockdown on state-run senior homes. And that I think came too late. That was on April 1st, that lockdown. I remember it, and I wasn't happy with that at all, because we had known about this COVID thing already a month and a half prior, even 2 months prior. And so I think that had they acted sooner, there wouldn't have been the massive amount of deaths that we have had. And all in all, we have 5.8 or 5.9 thousand deaths so far, but of that total, 90% is over the age of 70. So I have 4 children in school, and they only missed 1 week in total.
In the last 6 months.
In the last, or during this year, with the exception to summer. And
Summer,
the thing
right.
is that they're attending school. There's no, like I drop off the kids at the preschool, and basically they tell us, well, if your kid is showing any sicknesses at all or anything, then you have to stay home. If he's got a sibling, then both have to stay home. So I have twins as well, and they told us, like, if you see a runny nose, it doesn't look good, then both have to stay at home. And that.
But you would say, generally speaking, in Sweden, the public have been supportive of the herd immunity strategy.
Yes, and also you have to take into account that we have a culture of respecting people's personal space. And this is something that's been going on for, well, I've been here for 3 decades, and I've been observing this very closely, because I come from a Mediterranean culture where all we do is hug and kiss each other on the cheek and so on all the time. And we're very close, but when it comes to Sweden, everyone is all about personal space. Like, this is my zone, so do not step into it. And that was the thing that when the agency said, okay, everyone has to go into physical distancing, people were like, okay, what else is new? There's no, you know, what else are they going to tell us to do? Because so we don't wear masks.
God forbid they tell us to hug each other or kiss each other. That would be the challenge.
Exactly. So
listen, let's just wrap up, Sam, on your incredible creation as well with your 4 children. But hashtag OOTT. How? I mean, it's obviously become an instrumental part of the communication architecture of the oil and energy markets.
Right.
What inspired you to create it, and what do you think it's delivering to the markets?
Right. So back in 2016, when I in the early part of 2016, I was working on trying to aggregate the news flow of oil. Also, at the same time, building together a community that was interested in everything related to oil in terms of news, views, data, anything like that, and just put it all together under one little neat hashtag, which would encompass it all. So the hashtag stands for the hashtag Organization of Oil Trading Tweeters, because it was mostly around trading. And put that together, and we launched that in end of April 2016. So now it's 4.5 years now we've been running it. And it's been very successful in the fact that you can just put this thing on TweetDeck and watch it in real time, especially when Amina Bakr starts tweeting about the OPEC coverage. It's fascinating to watch these real-time news events happen and statements and so on.
It's resulted in her getting 100,000 followers. I think
yes, Mexico.
She owes OOTT quite a bit. In that respect, but we all do, and thank you for doing that. And it'll be busy today, of course, because OPEC are meeting, tomorrow in their virtual JMMC. But Sam Madani, thank you so much, co-founder of tankertrackers.com, founder of the hashtag OOTT. Thank you for being on Halftime Talk this week.
Thank you for having me on, Sean.